For decades, the Soviet Union was one of the most powerful forces in the world, dominating a huge part of the globe. But there are still many things about it that remain unknown or surprising to most people. Today, we're diving into 10 fascinating facts about the Soviet Union that you probably haven't heard before. Number 10. Khrushchev's speech. In 1953, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin died. For years, he was seen as a hero, praised by the government's propaganda. But just 3 years after his death, something happened that shocked the entire country. In 1956, the new Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, stood before top officials and revealed a shocking truth. In a secret speech, he exposed Stalin's terrible crimes. Khrushchev told everyone how Stalin had ordered the deaths of millions and created a climate of fear. People were stunned. For years, they had been taught that Stalin was a great leader who could do no wrong. Now, they were hearing about mass arrests, forced labor camps, and the killing of even his closest allies. The truth was so shocking that some people reportedly had heart attacks right there in the room. Others fainted or cried. Khrushchev's speech wasn't made public at first, but soon, word spread across the Soviet Union. People began to question everything they thought they knew. It was the start of de-Stalinization, where the country tried to move on from the horrors of Stalin's rule. Number 9. The origin of politically correct. These days, the term politically correct is everywhere. You hear it on the news, in debates, and on social media. But here's something surprising. This term was actually invented by the Soviet Union. Back then, the Communist Party used politically correct to describe the views they thought were the right opinions to have. It was their way of saying, this is what you should believe if you're a good citizen. But that's not where the story ends. Over time, American socialists picked up the term, but they used it as an insult. They would call someone politically correct to make fun of people who followed communist views without thinking for themselves. It was like saying, you're just agreeing with this because you're told to, not because you've thought it through. Sound familiar? That's because the term has changed a lot over the years. Today, it's mostly used to talk about avoiding speech that might be seen as offensive. But it all started with the Soviets and their way of controlling what people thought and said. Number 8. Soviet women in World War II. When we think of World War II, we often picture men on the front lines. But did you know that around 1 million Soviet women served in the war? They weren't just nurses or support staff. They took on some of the most dangerous roles, from snipers to pilots. One of the most fearless groups was called the Night Witches. These brave women flew old, noisy planes at night, sneaking behind enemy lines to drop bombs on German forces. They had no fancy equipment, just their skills and bravery. The Germans were so scared of them, they gave them the nickname Night Witches. Imagine being so good at your job that your enemies fear even the sound of your plane. But it wasn't just about flying. Soviet women also became some of the deadliest snipers in history. Take Lyudmila Pavlichenko, for example. She had over 300 confirmed kills, making her one of the most successful snipers ever. She was so respected that after the war, they even put her face on a stamp to honor her bravery. Number 7. The first spacecraft to land on another planet. When we talk about space exploration, most people think of the moon or Mars. But the very first man-made spacecraft to land on another planet was actually sent to Venus. It was called Venera 7, and it was launched by the Soviet Union. Back in 1970, the Soviets wanted to be the first to land a probe on another planet. They chose Venus, even though it's a really tough place to explore. Venus is extremely hot, with temperatures over 475 degrees Celsius, about 900 degrees Fahrenheit, and the pressure there is 90 times stronger than on Earth. It's like being deep underwater, but with a heat that can melt metal. Venera 7 launched on August 17, 1970, and traveled through space for almost 4 months. On December 15th, it finally reached Venus. Landing wasn't easy. The probe hit the ground hard, but it managed to survive long enough to send signals back to Earth. For 23 minutes, Venera 7 sent data from the surface of Venus. Scientists learned just how hot and intense the conditions were on the planet. It wasn't much time, but it was enough to make history. Venera 7 proved that we could land on other planets, even if they were harsh and dangerous. Number 6. Stalin's surprising childhood. When you think of Joseph Stalin, you probably picture a powerful, fearsome leader. But his childhood was nothing like that. Standing at just 5 feet 4 inches, young Stalin was often bullied for his height. He also had several health problems, including a left arm that was shorter than his right. Despite all this, Stalin was actually a bit of a bookworm. He loved to read and spent a lot of time outdoors, hiking and exploring. But things took a turn when he got older. He ended up dropping out of college. Some people say it was because of his health, but Stalin claimed he left to join the revolution. It's hard to imagine that a man who once struggled with bullying and health issues would go on to become one of the most feared leaders in history. Stalin's early years were full of surprises, showing that even the most powerful people can have humble beginnings. Number 5. The Soviet moon landing. When we think about the race to the moon, we usually picture Neil Armstrong's famous step in 1969. But did you know the Soviet Union almost joined the US in a joint mission to the moon? In the early 1960s, President John F. Kennedy had a bold idea. Why not team up with the Soviet Union to land on the moon together? It would have been an incredible moment, two rival nations working side by side to make history. But everything changed when Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. The Soviet leaders didn't trust the new U.S. president, Lyndon B. Johnson, so they backed out of the plan. Instead of teaming up, the two countries went back to competing against each other. The Soviet Union didn't give up on the moon. They built and tested their own lunar modules, hoping to send cosmonauts to the lunar surface. But there was a problem. Their N-1 rocket, which was supposed to take them to the moon, kept failing. While the U.S. was successfully launching their Saturn V rockets, the Soviet N-1 kept exploding during tests. After several failures, they had to abandon their moon plans. In the end, the U.S. won the moon race. Number 4. The nuclear close call. In October 1962, the world was on edge during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The United States and the Soviet Union were in a tense standoff, and everyone was worried about nuclear war. Deep in the ocean, a Soviet submarine named B-59 was hiding near Cuba. Suddenly, the submarine was hit by American depth charges. The crew thought World War III had started, and panic set in. The submarine had a nuclear torpedo on board. If the crew decided to use it, it could start a global disaster. The captain wanted to fire the torpedo, but he needed agreement from the other two senior officers. One of those officers was Vasily Arkhipov. He stayed calm and said they shouldn't fire. He convinced the others to wait and see what was really happening. When they surfaced, they learned that the U.S. was not attacking. Thanks to Arkhipov's cool thinking, they didn't launch the torpedo, and a nuclear war was avoided. If it weren't for Vasily Arkhipov, we might have faced a terrible disaster. His bravery helped keep the world safe that day. Number 3. Pavlov's house. During World War II, in the Battle of Stalingrad, one small house became famous for bravery. This is the story of Pavlov's house. In the winter of 1942, Stalingrad was the scene of fierce fighting between the Soviet Union and Germany. One house, defended by just 25 Soviet soldiers, stood strong. This was Pavlov's house, named after Sergeant Yakov Pavlov. As the German army advanced, they aimed to capture it, thinking it would be easy. But they were wrong. For days, the German forces attacked the house. But the 25 soldiers inside fought bravely. They used everything they had to defend it. The defenders held their ground, stopping many attacks and causing heavy losses to the Germans. They refused to give up. Later, a Soviet general joked that Germany lost more soldiers trying to take Pavlov's house than they did taking Paris. It became a legend of bravery. Number 2. The deepest hole on Earth. Did you know that the deepest hole ever dug by humans is over 40,000 feet deep? This amazing project was done by Soviet scientists. In the 1970s, these scientists wanted to see how deep we could drill into the Earth. They started a mission called the Kola Superdeep Borehole in Russia. After years of work, they reached a depth of 40,230 feet. That's deeper than the height of Mount Everest. But when they drilled deeper, they faced a big problem. The temperature got really high, reaching 356 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hot enough to melt some equipment. Because of the heat, they had to stop drilling. They realized that it was too hot to continue. Today, the Kola Superdeep Borehole is the deepest man-made hole on Earth. It helps scientists learn more about our planet. Number 1. The man who prevented nuclear war. In 1983, The world was on the edge of a nuclear disaster, and one man's quick thinking saved us all. Here's what happened. Soviet satellites sent out a terrifying alert. They detected what seemed like American missiles heading straight for the Soviet Union. The alarms blared, and Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov was the man on duty. Now, think about the pressure he was under. If he reported the alert, it could mean an immediate counterattack, sparking a full-blown nuclear war. But Petrov didn't panic. He had a gut feeling that something wasn't right. He took a deep breath, looked at the situation, and made a risky decision. Instead of following protocol and raising the alarm, he chose to wait. And guess what? He was right. It turned out that the satellites had made a mistake. They had mistaken harmless clouds for incoming missiles. By trusting his instincts and staying calm under immense pressure, Petrov stopped what could have been one of the worst disasters in human history. Thanks for watching.